Hello, thank you for joining us. Welcome to PACO's Workers' Compensation Roundtable. Today is Thursday, September the 21st, 2023. With us today, I will go ahead and share an announcement real quickly for those of you who have not yet registered for the BWE, which is next Friday on the 29th of September. It's going to be a great day. We've got a lot of good speakers lined up, and there's a happy hour afterward. It's going to be a great day. If you've not yet registered and you want to, please do so. We've extended registration, but our hard stop is tomorrow at noon. Tomorrow at noon, we have to provide menu choices to the venue, and after that, we will not be able to add anybody in, I don't think. So if you plan to register and you've not yet done so, please do that quickly. Okay, today we have with us Nicole Mayo. She is an attorney with Porter Wright. She is an associate attorney in the firm's labor and employment group. She works with clients to advise on various labor and employment matters, and Nikki counsels clients regarding compliance with both state and federal employment laws, including the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Family and Medical Leave Act. Nikki defends clients at workers' compensation hearings across Ohio and serves as counsel on a variety of employment matters nationwide. She brings previous experience providing support on privacy and data security issues, contract interpretation, and employment research as an in-house law fellow for a large auto manufacturer. She received her JD from the OSU Michael Moritz College of Law, and she is admitted to practice in Ohio, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Sixth Circuit, and the U.S. District Court for the Northern District and Southern District of Ohio. Welcome, Nicole. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And also, before I forget, we also want to thank Spectrum Reporting for providing today's video Zoom link and also videotaping today's session. As always, in a couple of weeks, 2-3 weeks, we'll have today's session video up on the website under the members only tab. So if you would like to revisit, please feel free to do so. And with that, I will turn it over to Nicole. Thank you.
Thank you guys so much for having me. I really appreciate the time to talk to you. And I want this to be, pretty informal. I don't know if you guys know Heather personally, but she knows me. I'm a pretty informal person. So if you have questions, feel free to interrupt. If you have comments, I'm hoping this is more of a conversation and less me talking at you. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. And I did want to note too, at Porter Wright, I split my practice between half workers' compensation and half traditional employment. So as Heather knows, I'm, all over the state doing hearings, and we are employer side. Okay, so we'll jump right in. Many of you may be familiar, but in 2022, there was some legislation in Ohio that firmly allowed for work from home injuries to be compensable if they met certain criteria. So we were sort of unsure. It was before the pandemic, people weren't working from home as much. And that's sort of what we're discussing, this whole change in culture from people working primarily on site to people working primarily from home. And I'd be curious to know if you guys, if most of your, clients have a lot of people that work from home in their workforce, or if most of you guys work with, hands-on clients. Feel free to jump in if you have comments on that. I think we have a bit of a half and half scenario, and obviously Ohio is pretty big for manufacturing. So a lot of those, employees cannot work from home, but regardless, so in September of 2022, that law was passed, and these are the factors that the employee must prove. And really, they don't look a whole lot different than the factors that an employee must prove when they get injured at work. It's just a bit harder to prove them. And this is hard, I think, on both sides, on the employer side and the employee side, because it's hard for the employee to say, you know, I was actually doing something in the course and scope of my employment. And it's hard for an employer to say, no, you were not. So I think that it can honestly be a challenge on both sides. Especially because they have to prove it's for the exclusive benefit of the employer. So, you know, if you're getting up, you're working from home and you're getting up to make a cup of coffee, I feel like that's an arguable thing. Like, let's say you slip and fall getting that cup of coffee. That's arguable whether or not, you know, if you were doing it for caffeine, I guess, like to help your employer, but it's not really in the course and scope of your employment. You know, but on the other hand, if you were on site at your employer and you slipped and fell to getting coffee, that would be compensable. So it's really tricky, I think, and this, you know, has only been around since 2022. So we're not seeing a lot of the effects of this new law just yet, but I'm sure we will, and I'm sure we'll continue to see a lot more as well. So like I said, work from home definitely will have an impact on many aspects of workers' compensation. And I mean, there's just so much, like obviously carpal tunnel or people alleging back, you know, injuries and issues because of maybe they don't have a chair that's ergonomic at home. So there's just a lot that I can foresee, you know, in the next few years coming about from this work from home culture. And more companies, like I said, are moving toward hybrid or fully remote models. So certainly this is going to become, you know, very relevant. Some of the most common injuries from work from home employees are those cumulative injuries by repetitive movement, carpal tunnel, tendonitis, bursitis, back pain, and then that's one category. And the second large category is slips, trips, and falls. Obviously, I'm a very clumsy person, so I fall a lot at home, and I not fall a lot, but I run into stuff and trip. And so I can only imagine others as well, you know, running into those kinds of issues at home. So one challenge definitely from work from home culture in the workers' comp, you know, field is investigations of these workplace injuries. A lot of our clients have robust investigation practices and policies for on-site injuries. How do you investigate someone who falls at home? That's a lot harder to do. So it's very fact specific on, you know, whether or not an injury that occurs at home, either cumulative injury or an actual, you know, fall or trip, would be compensable. And it's likely going to be into, you know, the equipment, a fact specific inquiry into the equipment utilized, how much control the employer has over the work environment. What makes this challenging too is there's no witnesses, as you would likely have, you know, I always go back to the manufacturing example. You would likely have a witness if someone got injured at work, you know, on the plant floor, but you're likely not going to have any witnesses to an employee who trips on their staircase at home, and whether or not they, you know, what if they were taking a conference call while they were doing that? There's just so many fact specific inquiries that will really come into play. And employees, yes. Do we have a question?
And Nicole, a thought that comes to mind is we have several clients who have security cameras inside the plant, inside the facility, and so inside the store. And so when an injury is alleged, you know, they can go back to the security video and see in real time, you know, what exactly happened. Right. But if somebody's working from home, you don't have that luxury.
Exactly.
And I imagine it would be way too invasive to try to set up any kind of surveillance cameras when somebody's working from home.
I will say though that I have cameras inside and outside of my house. So I can't say that if I ever get hurt, you guys can look at my cameras.
I mean, you would have to give authorization for them to see that video and, you know, give that video over to them. But if they've got just video cameras in the plant, in the facility, in the store, they just go to the security tape and they've got access to it immediately.
Exactly. And that's a great call out too. In addition to the witnesses, any, you know, surveillance footage that is certainly helpful. And I know that we've definitely utilized surveillance footage before for our clients in the past. So, I mean, and it's not like you're going to tap into a webcam or anything and, you know, record your employees working. And similarly, like you also said with with Heather's webcam or security camera footage, employees are not likely to let their employer into their home to do like a work site investigation or anything like that. So that whole element is also gone from, employees who hybrid or remote work. Again, surveillance. I don't know if it's been this way for your clients, but we're seeing a lot like claimants do not come to hearings in person, certainly as much as they used to. And so those times where the employer, let's say that an employee alleged that they got, they hurt their elbow at work. You could see that employee would come into work, they'd be wearing a sling or a brace. They would come to the industrial commission in the sling or the brace. Those injuries might be visible, but an employee who works fully remotely, especially if the employer doesn't have like a policy on video, if they have to be on, if you can take calls on Teams and WebEx without using video, you may never see that employee, ever in a video or face-to-face environment. So you may never be able to see, if they actually have, like indicators that they are actually injured. So that's a difficulty as well with the work from home remote, environment. And then if we think about temporary total disability compensation, definitely this is also heavily impacted by the remote work capabilities. Prior to this, employees who were injured at work and maybe they had a restriction where they couldn't stand, they may not have been able to accommodate that restriction. But if an employee can now work from home, we've got a lot more flexibility in terms of implementing those restrictions. And if an employee has restrictions where they can't go into the office, but they can, do their work fully remotely, they're not going to be eligible for temporary total anymore. So it's a good way to, cut off some compensation or, find an accommodation where the employee can still get a salary and still be working, on a regular basis. Obviously, considerations here, example I'm always going to go back to is manufacturing. Some employers cannot accommodate work from home. Obviously, if you're in a manual job, you cannot perform that from home. And some companies don't have the infrastructure set up already to have employers work from home and employees work from home on a regular basis. So that can also be a challenge. Side gigs. I don't know how many of you guys, are clued in. I'm not Gen Z, but Gen Zs are all about the side gigs, the side hustles. Side gigs can also, impact this analysis on whether or not the employee was actually injured, at your employer's work site or doing something for a different employer. I know a lot of the employees who work from home can sometimes maintain, like a not as involved second job that they may be doing at the same time as their regular employment, which is not, not what they're supposed to be doing, but they may do it anyway. And so it can be hard to show, whose direction and control employer-wise was this employee under when they got injured. What's interesting is there has been an overall reduction in workplace injuries since the pandemic and since this whole remote work, idea started. Pre-pandemic, before people went fully remote, it was thought that there would be a lot of soft tissue injuries from, working in a position that wasn't conducive, like people not having the proper office set up at home or people working from their beds or couches. But claims have remained lower than that pre-pandemic baseline that was seen. And this is nationwide, which I find interesting. Because certainly I remember when I started working from home and I didn't have the perfect setup and, it's hard to, sometimes your employer doesn't want to provide an ergonomic chair for your work from home setup. So I thought that was interesting. Lockdown obviously led to a steep decline in claims. Obviously, everything was closed, so people weren't going into their in-person jobs as often. They were cutting down on how many people were coming into the office at a particular time. And then I also found it interesting that in all of this, 2 age groups actually had an increase in their occurrence of carpal tunnel claims. And this was people aged 18 to 32, and then those over 80. So of every age group that increased, and just carpal tunnel, which obviously I think can be impacted by like your wrist support, if you're using a mouse, or if you're not, using a mouse, if you're using a trackpad, that can cause carpal tunnel, put strain on that nerve. Neck and back pain, computer elbow, shoulder pain, and stiffness all decreased during lockdown, which is also interesting because back to that idea of people working in, non-ideal, non-ergonomic, positions, but these all decreased despite that. And also, a lot of people were speculating that for these minor injuries, stiffness, back pain, things that could likely be attributed to your activities outside of work as well, people during the pandemic weren't going to seek medical care as often. It was hard to get into doctors. And so they might not have, sought medical care for those minor injuries like they might have if they were not working from home.
Yeah, and especially I know a lot of our clients have very specific policies that even if you don't think it's a major thing, if you have an injury at work, you have to immediately report it.
Yep.
And their policy is that you are immediately going over to the urgent care OCMED facility. Maybe there's a drug testing that is required.
Right.
But yeah, so if they're at home, and they don't, immediately, it might change the way they think about reporting things. Another
Absolutely.
a question I have for you, Nicole.
Yeah.
I'm curious, the increase in carpal tunnel and the increase in neck and back pain, do you think it is solely because of the environment and not being ergonomical, environments? Because you think about it, I mean, if with the days that I work at home, I'm doing the very same thing as I am doing on the days that I'm sitting here at my desk in the office. So do you think that's just a matter of not having the proper chair, the proper height of the monitors, the proper keyboard and mouse, perhaps?
Yeah. And I also think too, I think there can be this idea that if you work from home, you're expected to be in front of your computer for the entire 8-hour period, outside of using the restroom and eating lunch. I think when you're in the office, you don't feel as tied to your computer, you're interacting with people more, you're up and about a little more, I think, than you are at home. And I think for some employees, they feel like they must be, we all have, or most of us have the Teams that shows when you're gone, or, that tracks whether or not you're on your computer. And some employers do monitor, how long an employee is away from their desk. And so I think that also could be a contributing factor. But you make a great point. I mean, my setup here at my desk in the office is almost identical to my setup at home. I think that possibly for some employees who didn't have the capability to work from home pre-pandemic, maybe they didn't have a designated office at home. Maybe they were working from the couch without proper lumbar support,
Yeah. Yeah, because it wasn't until this week that I actually have a proper desk in my house. I've been working off of a folding table for the last 2.5, 3 years.
Right.
As a desk, so not the ideal setup.
Right. And I think that's definitely a contributing factor as well. Also, I think I have this little thing with the wrist, support in the office. And I think if an employee, wanted something like that for their house, they may not feel like they could ask their employer to provide that because it's for their home office. I think
Yeah.
sometimes employees don't exactly know where the line is drawn when they work remotely, especially for employers who don't have, firmly set in place policies on what they will provide, what they won't provide,
Yeah.
what kind of setup an employee has to have at home.
Yeah.
So I think that might also be a factor as well. Like you
Yeah.
said, you were working on a folding table for 2 years.
Yeah. And I do know that some employers, especially if you're working a hybrid position, you've got the wonderful ergonomic, all the bells and whistles set up at your desk in the office, but then they're going to give you the basics of what you need because they don't want to outfit too perfectly, bells and whistles offices. They're going to give you for home, they're going to furnish what they do furnish. It's going to be the essentials, what you really need.
Right.
And the bells and whistles, it will either be at your expense or just you won't have them.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good point.
Okay.
Working from home also can decrease the amount of COVID claims that you see as an employer. Obviously, your employees aren't interacting with one another, so there's no possibility of them to contract COVID at work. And I don't know if you guys have seen this from your clients or not yet. We have one of our first COVID allowances going to court. I think we're going to be seeing an increase in those, in years to come. COVID is, still around and still having impacts on employees and looks like it might be around forever, kind of like the flu. So I think that we're likely to see more and more people alleging that they contracted COVID at work. So remote work or working from home fully can decrease those allegations as well and those possible claims for, COVID contracted work, which will be interesting on a side note to see how that case law develops. Because how do you prove that someone got COVID at work when they could have gotten it, at any number of places in their personal life? I think that's kind of similar to injuries at home, fact-specific analysis that will be interesting to see how that case law, develops. I don't know if you guys have seen this at all with your clients, but work from home has also had a really negative impact on mental health for employees. So there's been an increase in psychological claims. As we know, you can't compensate a psych claim without a physical injury. So obviously those just, bare bones, just the psych claims aren't compensable. But, again, I personally could see this case law develop and, particularly like stress, these are all things that could be caused by work, but aren't technically compensable under the law at the moment. But working from home, what's interesting is 41% of employees who work from home reported elevated stress levels compared to only 25% of employees who worked on site reporting those elevated stress levels. So again, I think this ties back to, employees feeling like they have to sit in front of the computer all day. And a lot of companies don't require your camera to be on. I think people can join, these big team meetings that are meant to be, social and just sort of sit there and not participate. With people going fully remote, I think there's also a decrease in outside of work activities. And if you're not in the office, you're not as likely to have casual conversations with people. So it's decreasing, that sort of person to person interaction, which can be, a positive on mental health for a lot of employees. So some best practices to avoid some work from home workers' compensation claims are implementing a robust work from home policy that requires that employees follow rules, safety rules, and then, going through that requirement by requirement with that employee so they know what they're obligated to do. If you create fixed work hours, obviously, if an injury occurred during a a worker's, lunch period, then you would say that that wouldn't be compensable, and that would be a clear way to designate, what's under the employer's control and what's not. And similarly, define an employee's scope of work in a detailed way. Like we were talking about, provide employees with ergonomic equipment, chairs, laptop stands, keyboards, and then prepare a standard work from home environment where employees have to create, like we were saying, a dedicated workspace with those ergonomic elements, and define their work areas. So you could define a work area to, a desk and surrounding, floor space, but the employee's entire home, make it clear to the employees that they can't, just work from their kitchen or work from their couch. And that can also decrease some of these work from home claims. And obviously, continual communication with these remote employees to determine, what space they have, what they need for the space, can help create that sort of defined and safe work space and work environment. Questions or comments? Have you guys seen a lot of work from home injuries?
I have not seen any at all.
Okay, interesting.
In general, though, I know you had mentioned, how you're not seeing somebody come in wearing a brace or limping as they're working light duty or whatever. So, to see the extent to which they might be injured. I believe it was last September, we had a panel discussion. And who was our injured worker attorney? Kelly Willis. And one of the comments that she made is that we also had Tom Connor from the Industrial Commission with us. It was Mark Shaw, my attorney, Ms. Willis, and Mr. Connor, and we were just talking about how COVID, how this has changed the entire the way workers' comp works and the hearing process.
Yep.
And Ms. Willis made the comment, the observation that I think we can all agree with. It's actually been a benefit to the injured workers that they can, the hearings are available by WebEx because, and she said that from her perspective, she is seeing a huge increase in the number of injured workers who participate in their hearings, because before, they would have to take a day off,
right,
and come to the Industrial Commission. Maybe they didn't have, personal leave available. They couldn't get the day off. Maybe, they work third shift and, the hearings at 9 o'clock in the morning.
right.
And it's just become more convenient. And she said that they're seeing a much larger number of injured workers who have the ability to participate and come to the hearings by WebEx. And so she said that is definitely a huge change. And, she said it's a change in how, from her perspective, attorneys handle their hearings and the strategies they use, because a lot of times, you necessarily want your client there because they're just going to run off at the mouth and hurt themselves badly, right, by sharing too much information. But yeah, that was an observation that she had made.
Yeah, and I think that, I have a love-hate relationship with the WebEx, ability. I think that certainly it allows claimants to have a lot, like you said, a lot more participation opportunities. And I've actually had some of the claimants that I've had recently also turn their cameras on, which is interesting. Obviously, because that's not the normal, and the hearing officers can't turn their cameras on. They're not allowed to. So it's interesting that, I don't know. I think it's good to see a person and sort of be able to determine as a hearing officer, if you believe that person or not. And it's hard when they're just a voice coming out of the sky. But
Right.
I also think, you know, one time I had like it was a compensation for a thumb injury. And the question was whether or not it was above or below the joint, obviously, because that changes the compensation. And
Right.
I remember she attended via WebEx. She did not come in person. And both of the doctors had different, one doctor said it was above the joint, and one doctor said it was below the joint. So I was like, this would be a great opportunity for her to come in person and show us, like, is it above the joint or is it below the joint? You know, it's a clear question, but she was via WebEx and didn't have her camera on. So, you know, it was just a hearing officer, I guess, had to evaluate which doctor he thought had more credibility. But, you know, I think it's an interesting situation. And we have a lot of claimants counsel that appear only via WebEx too.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and I see we have a question. So if you want to produce the camera footage and you have, you know, footage of you getting injured, that would be a very easy way to, you know, show that you got injured actually in the course and scope of your employment. I think the question becomes harder on if you have the cameras and you don't want to produce the footage, then it's harder to prove. And I think a lot of people don't necessarily have footage of inside their house. I think a lot of people have footage of, you know, their front door, back door, but they probably don't, you know, record them working all day. So I think that's why it's hard to prove.
Another observation question that I have to go along with the whole thing, if people aren't coming to the hearings, you don't see them walking with a limp, you know, wearing the brace, wearing the neck brace.
Right.
You know, I know a lot of times we have in the past, from a defense perspective, you know, you've got a claimant that comes to the hearing wearing the neck brace and walking with the cane and hobbling along, and then you know, the doctor's office notes are inconsistent on whether they're using a cane or not. And then, so a lot of times we have at that point, you know, get surveillance
Right.
that coincides with a hearing to see them, how they portraying themselves, how they want to be seen. And then you pick them up at the IME. They walk into the doctor's office with cane, the neck brace, and everything. And as soon as they are done with their IME and they've portrayed themselves the way they want to be seen for the IME doctor, then they go to their car and ditch the brace and the cane, throw it in the trunk, and go about their day and, you know, go shopping without it and
Right.
whatnot. Are you seeing any kind of, or hearing anybody saying that they are increasing the surveillance, the investigative surveillance that they're using just to see what a person really and truly is up to? When they're talking about, you know, this guy's been off work for, you know, 6 months for a back sprain. Come on.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, it's kind of 50-50. Obviously, you know, you have to invest the time and the money into getting that surveillance. So I think, and I truly do think that, like, a lot of, you know, obviously there's bad apples everywhere, but I think that the majority of claimants actually, you know, do get injured at work, or, you know, I tend to think that people are, I'm overly trusting. I think that people are good at heart, which isn't always necessarily the case. But I think that for that reason, I don't think employers are, you know, as frequently thinking that people are lying about, you know, the extent of their injuries. Particularly, you know, when we can send them to multiple IMEs, you know, we can send them to a doctor and the doctor will do a physical exam on them and confirm, you know, obviously if they had pain or if there was something that was observable in an, you know, like an objective way that wasn't subjective, the doctor would know that. So I think it's a half and half. Heather was telling me a couple of stories of when they use surveillance. I think at your prior firm, right, Heather, to show that. I always think those stories are so interesting. But I don't know that there's been an increase in surveillance following, you know, the
Okay.
work from home push. Any other questions, comments, concerns, thoughts?
Are you seeing anything to indicate that more employers are taking advantage of the ability to work from home and being able to provide light duty work?
So I would say majority of our clients really do have hands-on employees. And I'm trying to think about even one, I've not firsthand handled a work from home injury. I think most of our clients people are out on the road, physically performing jobs, in a plant. So you could always argue restrictions, for temporary total at the industrial commission, at hearings. So I think that if an employer did want to, take advantage of that opportunity to allow work from home to maybe cut off that, I think the claimants council would they'd get clued into that pretty quickly. And I think they would start appealing those.
Yeah. I was thinking of a client that we had, a new client that came on board recently, and they had a gal that was, she had restrictions, could not go out on the road and be in the field doing her job. But as a light duty alternative, they allowed her to work from home watching training videos.
Interesting.
And, that was what she was doing. 8 hours a day was watching training videos. And then, she of course got to the point where she had watched all the videos. Now what? But yeah,
Interesting.
that's the only instance I can think of that I've heard of.
Yeah. And I think that it's really fact specific on, working from home, particularly because if you work from home, like you could put a strain on the people who are in the office, so there's all those kinds of considerations to take into account when you're thinking about that. And also, do you provide your employees with laptops? Do you need to provide your employees with laptops if they're working from home? Those kinds of questions. Or can they use personal laptops and remote in? I think sometimes employers don't want to create a policy or procedure for, one person. So we'll see if this, work from home trend continues, and employers might start to have some robust workers' comp work from home policies.
Okay. Any other comments, questions, conversation? You're a quiet group. Okay, well, if not, and Nicole, if you don't have anything else to add, then we'll go ahead and wrap things up. I did want to mention, next month, our workers' comp roundtable session will be on October the 19th at noon, again, by Zoom. Ken Finley of V&A Risk Services is going to join us then. He's going to talk about what kinds of workers' compensation coverage is available to employers in Ohio. How do they get coverage? Different claims management strategies and different rebate programs that the BWC offers to employers. So I think I have it set up. Actually, registration is available today. So you can go ahead and register for that. It's on the event calendar on the website. And I hope that you will join us. Again, we want to thank Nicole for her sharing her time and her expertise with us, and Megan Rogers over at Spectrum Reporting for handling our Zoom link and our videotaping today. And don't forget, if you haven't yet registered for the BWE, do that. You don't want to miss it. It's going to be a great day. And that is all that I have. So I will give you back the last 20 minutes of your lunch hour, and we'll see you next month. Thanks, everybody.